Good morning to all of you. I'm going to speak briefly about the human resources perspective about this whole issue about tariffs and how it's affected the supply chain and on down the line. So over the last 27 years, my company has focused on recruiting talent, particularly professional level talent in the manufacturing industry throughout Mexico. With over 5,000 placements. So we see the effects of all this from the human side, from the people side. And tariffs have become kind of the order of the day. And as such, I would call it probably the New World Order. And this is not going to go away anytime soon. So as such, as we talk about how it's disrupted the supply chains and so forth, we're seeing from many of our clients, which are global corporations that have manufacturing operations in Mexico, we're seeing many of them that have operations in Mexico and also in China relocate or talk about relocation into Mexico. There was a recent survey that was done by the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, and they polled somewhere upwards of 350, 400 companies that belong to the Chamber. And they mentioned that about 40% of those companies are looking to relocate or are thinking about relocating from China. Obviously, as a result of uncertainty with tariffs, primarily, and we could add other things as well, logistics, which takes over 30 days to get into their main market, United States, et cetera, et cetera. But 10%, just a little bit over 10%, nearly 11% of those companies polled are thinking about relocating or nearshoring into Mexico, or are actually relocating into Mexico. Companies like Hasbro, or that have been publicly announced, or Panasonic, or DEITAC, amongst other companies. Some companies of ours that I can't mention that are thinking about relocating part of their manufacturing operations into their existing plants here in Mexico. And even starting new plants in other locations throughout Mexico to diversify. I think what companies are trying to do is diversify the risk. And as you've seen, Mexico is one of those locations, but Southeast Asia is another primary location for them. You know, primarily Vietnam and Thailand is some of the places that our clients talk about constantly when we meet with them. But certainly Mexico is a strategic place for them, primarily because Mexico has more free trade agreements than any other country in the world. And so you can actually reach many countries through those free trade agreements, tariff-free. So as a result of all this, and companies either talking or planning or actually already relocating and nearshoring into Mexico, that has put a big strain on the human resources side. And so from that perspective, what we've seen is we're running at virtually very low unemployment here in Mexico, particularly in the border areas. Tijuana is obviously no exception. Recently, not a few months ago, I read that there was a deficit of 14,000 people with spots open that can't be filled here in the city alone. This is just here in Tijuana. Places that have similar situations are places on the border like Juarez, for example. And I think that has also put a strain when you can't fill the positions you have because you have a shortage of people and of talent. It causes turnover as well. or at least it puts a strain on retention, because other companies, are according to supply and demand, are trying to pay a little more so that they can get those individuals into their operations, and so causing a bigger strain. So that has caused some companies to have turnovers upwards of 7–8% per month, which is nearly 100% turnover of their workforce per year. And so those are some of the issues that we're dealing with. So from my perspective, some of the common topics that I talk about with many of these global corporations when I meet with them is, what can you do to launch programs to retain your talent? From a creative side, can you strengthen your onboarding process, which sometimes is not up to par? Can you strengthen your training programs to give some value added to your, we talk about is strengthen your recruitment programs, right? Recruiting the talent. And two things that we focus when we talk about these subjects with our clients is, one of them is, do you have a value proposition? I mean, as a company, what is your value proposition? What do you sell about your company differently than the company across the street? And so we talk about a number of things in that value proposition. What percentage of your profit do you reinvest into research and development? Do you have a well-defined company culture? Is there a career path within your company, right? Do you have one developed? Is there succession planning? Do you value bench strength, right? What are you doing on those ends? When it comes to recruitment, do your hiring managers, do they know how to interview? One of the issues that we have is human resources interviews potential candidates, but then the hiring managers interview, but they don't know how to interview. So basically, they do such a poor job sometimes that individuals aren't interested. There's people that say, well, why would you want to work here? We work long hours, and they use a different approach. We work long hours, it's rough, it's noisy, it's hot, some of those things. And so they need to be trained as well on interviewing techniques. The market is so competitive out there that it's very difficult to attract talent right now, because there's just so much demand and little supply. So going back to tariffs, that's putting a bigger strain here in Mexico, because we're seeing the hiring increase because of the need. They hate uncertainty. And if we don't have rules of the game that are well established, then companies are going to continue to diversify their manufacturing base and their supply chain base. They're going to spread it around. They're going to spread it through Vietnam, through Thailand, through India, Indonesia. These are places, Mexico, and the United States being, 60% of China's export partner, right? One of their biggest partner. Mexico is conveniently situated right to the south. So that's my perspective. From the human resources side, I'll give it up to.
Thank you. So I think at this point,